So the president of the United States sent some drones over to Iraq to shoot an Iranian general who the U.S. has called a terrorist, and Congress, led by, well, primarily House Democrats, are really, really mad about it, and Nancy Pelosi is demanding answers and saying it was unlawful. But was it unlawful? I don't think the question's that simple. Let's have a brief talk about it. Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to Law-Splaining the Interwebs. I'm your host, Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. And today we're going to tackle what looks like a very simple question. Does the president require congressional approval to carry out a military strike in a foreign country? But one thing you'll learn very quickly with constitutional law is constitutional questions are never that simple. They're never that simple, and they're never this broad, and that is true today. If you like these short form videos and these educational sort of style, go ahead and click that like button, click subscribe and the notification bell, and watch them whenever they pop up. Share them to your friends, and open up a discussion about constitutional law or other aspects of law with somebody, and talk about it. Because I'm going to tell you the spoiler right now. It's really an unclear answer. There isn't a clear answer on whether or not the strike against Qassem Soleimani over an Iranian general who was over in Baghdad in Iraq, if that drone strike required congressional approval or was a valid act of the president or not. That's the spoiler. There isn't really a right answer. So let's look at why this is such a big conflict. Well, the first reason it's a big conflict involves the immediate political implications of attacking of blowing up, for lack of a better word, the general of a foreign military force, especially one like Iran, where we have had a history of back and forth over the past several decades with the Iranian government. So the political implications are what cause the uproar, right? That's the problem. We've got some people who are very happy to have this guy killed because he is alleged to have been involved in the deaths of all sorts of American armed forces people and civilians as well, and the deaths of tons of other people in propagating conflict in the Middle East. So some people are very happy to see him gone. Other people are concerned that a strike like this from President Trump will spark a war over in Iran, or over with Iran, that would cause, potentially even more U.S. troops to have to die, would entangle the United States in another Middle East quagmire. And these are valid points on both sides. They really are. But these aren't the legal authorities that we need to go to, right? These are political questions that have to be answered about whether or not someone supports or doesn't support an individual action. The question raised by Nancy Pelosi is the broad question of, does the president require congressional approval to carry out a military strike? But let's talk about how con law works, because con law cases aren't that broad. There's too much involved in invoking the powers of Congress to declare war, invoking the power of the president as the commander-in-chief, and the interplay between those two entities. And then that's ignoring all of the various acts and resolutions that have been passed from the founding of our country to today, and how the Supreme Court has interpreted the ability to use military force and what is required from the president and what is required from Congress. So a very high level overview. Congress has the sole power to declare war, right? It must be declared by the houses of Congress. That's how war occurs between two countries. But that is not the same as a military action. The president of the United States is the military's commander-in-chief, and his authority as commander-in-chief is plenary. It is unquestionable. He is the commander-in-chief. Congress has the ability to restrict somewhat the actions of the commander-in-chief by declaring or not declaring war, or through the power of the purse. They can cut funding to the various military branches if they believe that the powers of the commander-in-chief are being used inappropriately. Now, along with this was something passed back in 1973 that's still around. This is the fall of the Vietnam War, and it's called the War Powers Resolution. Now, if you're not really aware, the United States hasn't actually declared war on anybody since the Korean War. So that means the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the other Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the Syrian War, various actions in Africa, Kosovo, Bosnia, all of these different places weren't actually wars. They weren't. Not by legal definition, they were not wars. And there's some different stuff that could go into that. But at the end of the day, these are not legally wars. There's something, the Vietnam conflict is classically categorized as a police action. But it was the president gradually justifying the police actions in Vietnam that built this up into a conflict that became too big to quickly withdraw from, and it caused obviously a lot of stress. I mean, this is something people still fight over today, is the validity of the Vietnam War, and it was never actually declared by Congress. So they implemented something called the War Powers Resolution back in 1973. Now, the War Powers Resolution has various parts, but what matters today is this provision that requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of conducting some sort of military strike. And there's some other language involved in it. But one thing that we have to be careful with is there's no one who's really tested whether this provision of the War Powers Resolution is constitutional, or whether the resolution is constitutional at all, because it does play on a very significant discussion between the powers of Congress and the powers of the president in their constitutional roles. So this hasn't ever gone before the Supreme Court with the question of the president did this and didn't authorize Congress, or didn't ask for authorization from Congress. So what's the actual remedy? The Supreme Court's never ruled on it. We don't know if it's constitutional. We don't know what the remedy would be. It just says he should do it. The answer is simple to all of this. Not the constitutional question answer, but the answer to what happens is ultimately simple. It's impeachment. This is what we do when a president is doing what we don't want them to do. We impeach him, right? But here's the problem with impeachment, right? If you've seen my other video on impeachment, you know that impeachment comes with a huge political cost. And there's a lot of people who are really glad that Soleimani is dead. There's a lot of people who are really happy about that because he seems like a bad guy, and he may have been involved in specifically instigating a terrorist attack against the United States Embassy just weeks prior. Days prior? I don't know when that was. Just not long ago, right? If he was involved in that and then he gets killed, is that the worst thing in the world? That's a question people have to wrestle with. And it's a politically dangerous question for people in Congress, especially who may be facing re-election. They have to assess if their constituents are mad enough that the president conducted a military strike to overcome that they're kind of relieved that a bad guy got blown up by good US missiles, right? They have to weigh that out, or they have to weigh it in the opposite. Are the people going to be, you know what I mean? Are they going to be mad enough that the president blew up a guy to overcome their distrust of Congress or whatever? This is a big political question, and this is why impeachment is the way that all of this stuff is really sorted out. Are the president's actions that intensely bad or unpopular that Congress is willing to risk the political damage to themselves to impeach the president? Now, Donald Trump is in a manner pseudo-impeached already. We won't really know until the House actually delivers the articles of impeachment to the Senate and they do the trial if he will be removed from office at the time of recording this video. We don't know when that'll be or what that will look like, but he's already kind of impeached. Congress could simply pass another article of impeachment and add this to their current stack if they want to do that. The question is, do they want to do that? So in practical terms, can the president engage in a military strike against someone without the approval of Congress? Sure, he did. What's the remedy? I don't know. Bring the guy back to life? Like, what are we going to do? We're going to give some money to his family or something? Nope. Not a chance. So the resolution to all of this ultimately becomes impeachment. But there is an important question that's going on here that we have to focus down on. And this is what I was getting at with that War Powers resolution. That's not the only resolution in play here. We also have the authorized use of military force passed after the 9/11 attacks, hashtag never forget, on September 11th of 2001. These were passed shortly after, and it authorized our use to authorized the use of military action to engage the forces responsible for the terrorist attack on our country, right? And it also authorized the president to go farther than just the people directly involved, to even go after people who have provided aid to the people who were involved in this. This authorized use of military force passed in 2001, and I think there was an update to it in 2002, have been around since then, have had plenty of opportunities to be rescinded or repealed. The conflicts over there are largely in a police capacity rather than a wartime capacity, and they could definitely be repealed or pared back, and they have not done so. Congress has not done so. So the question then becomes a little more complicated, right? It's no longer just, does the president have the ability to carry out a military strike without the authorization of Congress? It's or is he required to give it under the War Powers resolution? Is the War Powers resolution even constitutional? And even if they are, is he already authorized by Congress under the authorized use of military force, or the resolution adding the authorized use of military force in Iraq that followed? Do those things give the president the power to do this against this guy? There's another section we have to go to. Remember when I said that constitutional law questions are not this broad? They're not. They become very, very narrow, and that's an important thing. There are too many factors to consider to make them as broad as just president can't do this or president can do that. So we have to ask about Qassem Soleimani. So we have the relationship with Iran to consider. Is Iran an enemy of the state? Well, maybe. Have we declared war against them? No. Like I said, we haven't declared war against anybody. But do his actions in Iran and Iraq and his 2018 classification as a terrorist and his organization as a terrorist group, do those things then bring him under the auspices of the authorized use of military force? And the answer is, I don't know. And neither does anybody else. And we can send this question to the Supreme Court and try to have them resolve it and get clarity on it. But at the end of the day, we have a president who is commander-in-chief and, I left this out, the sole organ of foreign relations. And it's his job to determine the national security and national relations impact of a strike against someone like this, and whether or not he can use his commanders-in-chief powers to go ahead and do that. And the political risk for the president is impeachment. At the end of the day, this question is one that is better resolved by a question of impeachment. Is Congress brave enough to contest the president's action by impeaching him? Is the president confident enough in his action or his Congress that he will weather the storm that will fall out from the action he took as commander-in-chief? There is no Supreme Court that's going to come in and say, bad Donald Trump, don't do this, you mean orange man. You walking Cheeto, here's a slap on the wrist. Don't blow up the next terrorist you come across, because when he does blow up the next terrorist he comes across, the Supreme Court will have the same amount of power to say, no, you can't do that again. And ultimately, the resolution will be impeachment or election, right? Impeachment or election. So hopefully this video has sparked a little bit of thought for you on the issue, let you know how we look at constitutional questions. They're not broad, they're narrow. And if you think a constitutional question that you're talking about with a friend or someone online or someone that you hate, like on Twitter or whatever, if you think that constitutional question sounds too simplistic, it likely is. If it's broad, it's not going to have an answer at all. If it's narrow, you might be able to find an answer, but you really have to then start to get into, well, let's say it's wrong for the president to do this. How do we solve that? Like, they're not going to put him in jail. The Supreme Court can't stop him, and neither Congress nor the Supreme Court can overrule an order from the chief executive of the armed forces. They just can't do that. So what's the resolution in this case? Looks like it's impeachment or an election if you're unhappy with what Trump did. If you're happy with it, just cheer about it, because this ultimately becomes a political question. I personally don't want war in the Middle East. Do I think this military strike against Soleimani will provoke war in the Middle East? God, I hope not. But it might. I don't think it will. At the end of the day, I don't think this particular thing will drag us into war, but it could. I'm not an expert on foreign relations or anything like that. The president and his advisors are the people who have to make those calls. That's why the presidency is ultimately important. And again, no congressman, no senator, no Supreme Court justice can come in and undo the order of the president to authorize a military strike. They can't do it. There's not a mechanism for it. They can just complain about it after, or they can remove him from office. So anyway, hope this helps you kind of frame that debate in your own head and go out there and talk about it. That's how we work these issues out. That's how we resolve them as a country. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember to like and subscribe. Leave a comment on what you think about the president's action. I'd be interested to hear it. All right, guys, have a good night. Peace. Peace.